The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Jen Saunders. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I would like to welcome you to our webinar series on rapid rehousing. We are so delighted today to have our speaker, Tina Patterson, who is CEO of Homefull, discussing how Dayton, Ohio has used the rapid rehousing model and some of the impressive outcomes that they have seen with this intervention. Tina will also discuss how the program integrates coordinated entry to address homelessness for a variety of populations. So a quick agenda for today's presentation. I'll just do a really quick overview of rapid rehousing. Tina will also be touching on that as well. And then Tina will give her presentation. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So please send us your questions at any time during the webinar. You should see a questions box off on the right. And just a few housekeeping items. The audio and slides will be posted on our website following the webinar. We will also send it out to all those who registered. And with that, I will just begin my really quick overview of rapid rehousing. Most of you are already familiar with rapid rehousing. It's an intervention designed to help individuals and families quickly exit homelessness and return to permanent housing. It's offered without preconditions, and the resources and services provided are typically tailored to the unique needs of a household. The core components are listed on the slide. Tina will go into them in more detail, but they are housing, identification, rent and move-in assistance, and case management and services. And while a rapid rehousing must have all three core components available, it's not required that a single program provide all three services, nor that a household utilize them all. So I am going to now turn it over to Tina to begin her presentation. Thanks so much, Tina.
Great, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me and hopefully hearing a little bit about what we're doing in Dayton, Ohio, and specifically what we've been doing here at Homefull. And so a little bit before I go to the next slide about Homefull and who we are and what we do. We've been around a while. We're quickly approaching our 30th anniversary, and we started in the basement of a church here in Dayton as really a response of a place for people to go. And from that, we really grew to become a full, comprehensive continuum of care for people experiencing homelessness. We work with people all along the continuum of homelessness, from the prevention and diversion to street outreach to emergency shelters, housing-focused case management, coordinated entry, and then on to the last piece, which is housing. That housing comes in a component of either scattered site permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing. In the older days, we did transitional housing, and now we do much more of the scattered site rapid rehousing. And then we're also a Medicaid reimbursed behavioral health service as well that's really integrated through all of our programs. So we are, I guess we're one of those providers that can say we do a little bit of everything, and we're very proud of the work that we do, and more specifically of the outcomes about ending homelessness for people. So a little bit about us, and hopefully you know that many of you are providers, and we are all in the same place trying to end homelessness. So let's move on and get started. Next slide. So just to recap what Jen had said about the core components of rapid rehousing, many of you have heard this before, so we want everybody to make sure that they understand that there really are these three major components, and housing identification is the first one. That means we're recruiting landlords, we're addressing barriers to landlord participation, and we're assisting households to find housing. And that's a key component, and as Jen had mentioned, not all core components have to be done by one single organization. This could be partnerships and so forth. The next critical piece or core component is rent and move-in assistance. We all know that this is the phase that is the key piece, is understanding that rapid rehousing is about financially assisting people to move from homelessness to housing, and more importantly to housing stabilization. So we provide financial assistance And that financial assistance really needs to be flexible. And I mean that, and you're going to hear a little bit about what that means later in my presentation. But there isn't a one-size-fits-all in homelessness, and nor should there be in the financial assistance package either. And then again, the other key piece, and being a service provider first and foremost, we recognize that really the key to success in a rapid rehousing program is this case management and services, and recognizing that it isn't about just finding the housing, it really is about stabilization once into housing. We have to first recognize that our consumers have choices. Those choices aren't taken away by saying you must live in a certain place, you must take this house in order to be enrolled in the program, and so forth. The other thing that we are is we're advocates and we provide support. And I also say not only are we advocates, but we're key negotiators. We learn to negotiate on the behalf of our clients, and you can call it good advocacy or you can call it negotiation skills. Either way, it is on the behalf of the client. Obviously, the other key piece to it is the connection to appropriate support and resources, recognizing what our clients need, where they are at, and figuring out how to link them to those kinds of services. And then again, client-directed and voluntary. Their relationship in this is that it isn't that you must do, and I think that's gone from the days where we used to be very rigid in the way in which we provided case management. Now it is to be really an integrated approach working with the client. What is it that you want to do? I always say I have this high demand or this low demand, high expectation for our consumers, and really that is that voluntary client-directed approach. Next slide. So Homefull's been doing rapid rehousing for a while now. We were one of the first of the 23 pilot projects that came out of the FY 2008 COC. And even prior to the 08, we had done a small little pilot with local resources here to test this new phenomenon of rapid rehousing. And then obviously we all recognize that right after the pilot projects were announced for the families, HPRP came about as well, which was really, provided a springboard into recognizing that rapid rehousing is really this key to ending homelessness for folks. So we were one of the first ones, and then additionally since then we have grown our rapid rehousing to go outside of that with additional COC funded programs, also using ESG, both local and state, and then obviously some local funds as well. So rapid rehousing isn't new to us at all, and we've just been refining it over the years and really recognizing what works and what doesn't work. So, so we kind of tend to believe that we want to pass on some of the lessons learned that we've been able to do over the years. When you think about having done it for 9 to 10 years, that's a long time. So we'll move on. Next slide. So a little bit about Dayton, Ohio's homeless system. So we have a strong COC, which basically it's very well organized. It provides a lot of oversight, very outcome driven. We've kind of always been on the cutting edge here in Dayton, and I take that from a strong leadership at the high level of the COC. It's very diverse. It has a lot of membership that are outside of the traditional homeless system, but it's created lots of partnerships and opportunities. So we're very, very proud of our local COC. We've had significant reductions in chronic homelessness over the years, increased an impressive amount of permanent supportive housing for folks, a good partnership with our public housing authority, and it all comes from a strong COC. Additionally, we've had coordinated entry with a front door assessment for probably about 8 years now as well, and we are now into the refinement kind of stage of our coordinated entry process and really kind of fine-tuning what we've been doing for quite some time and evaluating, what does our tool look like. We've had a customized tool and it has worked very well, but now that transitional housing is kind of on its way out, rapid rehousing is looking a little different, we're actually now starting to tweak our assessment process and really kind of making sure that it is still pertinent and adds value to our system, which obviously it does. Along with our coordinated entry, we have a centralized wait list, which is managed by our Montgomery County Homeless Solutions Department. So it allows us to chronic or identify people of high priority, such as chronics, and really manage where people are on the wait list so that we can quickly identify openings, put people into those slots that are the most at risk, and really provide housing in a quick, efficient way to those that are most vulnerable. We've had significant reductions in TH programs over the year, so we've not really had to address the fact that we were loaded with transitional housing. We continued to make changes from the transitional housing programs to rapid rehousing models and or permanent supportive housing models, and even some transitional housing programs in our community have gone, completely gone. And again, this is very strategic and been part of the strong COC leadership that we have. Additionally, rapid rehousing is scored at our front door, and it's done rather quickly, because you'll learn a little bit about that later on, about why that's a key piece to effectively, rapidly rehousing folks. In Dayton, we have what we consider to be a very diverse rapid rehousing population, and diverse meaning that not all of them look the same. They have different levels of barriers. It's not this perfect little middle group of folks that are employed and are going to just need a quick assistance, and they're going to be out on their own and do well. Our rapid rehousing population is very broad, and you'll see that when I talk a little bit more about the specifics of what our rapid rehousing population looks like. Additionally, we serve both singles and families in rapid rehousing in Dayton. All right, next slide. All right, here we go. So what does our snapshot of what the rapid rehousing population in 2015 look like? Well, for our families, and I've actually divided these up, and you'll see the next slide talks a little bit about the singles, but I've divided them up in the family program and then in our singles. So we served 88 families in permanent or in our rapid rehousing program last year. 87% of them were female head of households. They had an average of 3 children per household. 65% of all the children were under the age of 5 years old. I don't think that's a real surprise to a lot of people. We recognize that households that are homeless have lots of children under the age of 5 years old. Again, 60% of those families had no income. So gone are the ideas that you must have an income to be successful in rapid rehousing. We are serving people in rapid rehousing with no income. And I know a lot of people say, how do you do that? How are they going to be successful come when the assistance ends? Well, that's some of the key pieces to having a successful program. But it's also one of the key pieces to ending homelessness in your community. If you waited for everybody to have income in order to house them, then people would remain homeless for a very long time. So again, 60% of these families, and when you think about 60% of the families had no income, that actually meant they had no benefits where they were receiving, cash income of any kind. So there was a lot of work to be done with families with no income. Only 1% had income from employment, and 100% were considered. So even that 1% that had income from employment, it was extremely low income. Over 50% had reported recent episodes of domestic violence. I know a lot of people tend to believe that a rapid rehousing model isn't appropriate for domestic violence. I think that's to be debated. We recognize that we were serving families that had recent episodes of domestic violence in our program. Again, in the service piece of that, you have to be mindful. In placing them in housing in neighborhoods, you have to be very sensitive to that statistic as well, but it does exist. 63% report mental illness. This is 63% of the family head of households report mental illness. Again, going back to the fact that you don't have to look a certain way to be a rapid rehousing candidate. And then 30% report chronic alcohol and drug addiction. And again, this might look a little bit like a PSH candidate. There's substance abuse, there's mental illness. Why aren't they a PSH? Well, particularly in our community, we look at first-time homeless, and those kinds of things. You might be able to have a mental illness and chronic alcohol and drug addiction and still be rapidly rehoused. It doesn't default you necessarily to just being a permanent supportive housing. And so we're looking at models that say, you know, this is what our population looks like, and making sure that we actually develop the support services that will meet those needs so that they're going to be successful once we place them into housing. All right, next slide. This is the population snapshot for our singles. We served 126 single households. 58% of those were men, 42% were women. The average age was between 45 and 54 years old. 100% were extremely low income. Additionally, 46%, and this is slightly different than what you might have seen with the families, is 46% reported a physical disability. Again, a little bit different than the families because we didn't have a high prevalence of the physical disabilities, but this was something we saw. And again, these demographics pretty much look a little more similar to what you're seeing in your shelter community as well. 42% report mental illness, 33% reported chronic alcohol, drug addiction, and only 2% were veterans. And the 2% veterans were really because this was not an SSVF. We have a very strong SSVF program in our community that's been around for a while, and so veterans are typically referred for a rapid rehousing model inside of that program. So I guess again, if I want to put out there is that we're not serving this perfect rapid rehousing population that have low barriers, that just down on their luck, you know, low income, but boy, if we can help them find housing, they're going to be successful. We're talking about serving that hard to serve population in rapid rehousing. It can be done. All right, next slide. So again, the rapid rehousing benchmarks reminder, and this really is a reminder, I'm sure you've all have followed finally the announcement of what it is we're going to be looking at in terms of the benchmarks for achieving in rapid rehousing. I think they were announced a few months ago. There's been a few webinars and so forth. So I'm just going to reiterate these to you again. So first, reduce the length of time program participants spend homeless. To meet that goal, households served in the program should move into permanent housing in an average of 30 days or less. And there's always a little bit of debate on that 30 days or less. So this says households served by the program should move into program housing in an average of 30 days or less. We want to be very mindful of the fact that the 30 days is really about once they're enrolled in the program. We've been working really hard here in Dayton, and you'll see a little bit about that in looking at that 30 days homeless, not just enrolled in rapid rehousing, but really getting to where people are staying on average of 30 days or less as a homeless person. Second is permanent housing success rates. 80% of the households that exit a rapid rehousing program should exit to permanent housing. 80%. That basically is really talking about making sure that people, when the rental assistance and support services in, that they're going to successfully stay housed. All right, so not into a back to shelter when the rental assistance ends, not, you know, to jail when the rental assistance ends, but it really is about what's the permanent housing. It's not to say, though, that there are some folks that exit a rapid rehousing program into subsidized housing, into a permanent supportive housing, or any of those kinds of features, but it is permanent housing. And third, returns to homelessness. This really is about recidivism, that 85% of the households that exit a rapid rehousing program to permanent housing should not become homeless again within a year. Basically, this is recidivism. So we're really looking at only 15% return to homelessness. So again, this is a reminder, so ironically, Homefull had already begun to look at these even before the benchmarks were officially announced. Those were the key areas that we wanted to pay attention to. All right, next question, or next slide. So here are our rapid rehousing outcomes for 2015. So for our families, we had an average days in shelter were 33 days. For our singles, that was 68 days in shelter. As you can see, I didn't give myself the check mark there because we didn't achieve those goals. But ironically, what we were looking at is those are entire times of their duration into homelessness, from the first night in shelter until they exited. It isn't from the time they were enrolled in rapid rehousing. So if you look at a natural kind of progression, people enter into the shelter, they could spend a day or two before they're given an intake, an assessment, and then get into case management, where they're then going to get their rapid rehousing case manager, and the process would start. So for us, we could potentially cut down right now the 33 days in shelter for families. You could cut off about 10 to 15 days. For our singles, which that process is a little longer, we could probably cut off about 20 days onto that as well. So we're a little excited, but we wanted to be very transparent in saying we've been measuring that entire period of homelessness before moving into housing, not just enrollment into rapid rehousing. So we think we're on track. We'll see what we're doing. We're tracking that now, and very excited about getting to that. And just as a side note, those 33 days and 68 days is still a significant reduction over the last 3 years. We've practically cut down in half the days in shelter. So we're very excited because, you know, again, I always say, this is rapid rehousing. This isn't gradual housing. This is rapid. So additionally, we have a 100% positive exits in our families. 87% positive exits, which is why I have the check marks there. We've achieved the benchmark, and these were even before the benchmarks. And then we had a 0% recidivism for families and a 12% recidivism for our singles. Additionally, we tracked the incomes 100%, and remember, there was a big number of people that had zero income for those families. So 100% of our families increased their income at exit. 81% increased their income of our singles. And why that wasn't more is there were some who had some income. These were singles, remember that physical disability that existed, so it could have been a Social Security disability or something along those lines. But again, they were all low income. 56% of our families were employed at exit. That's a very high number. 52% of our singles were employed at exit. The average length of time in our rapid rehousing program for our families was 7 months, and 5 months was the average length of time in a rapid rehousing program for our singles. All right, next slide. So how did we do it? Next slide. So some of the strategies, and I'm going to frame some of the work that we've been doing by the benchmarks, all right? So first and foremost, that first benchmark was to reduce the length of time participants spend homeless. And remember, I told you we were. So we're working on it, but we're getting there. And that is 30 days or less. So how did we do it? First off, housing first. And I know we're all hearing a lot about housing first. There's probably been webinars specifically on housing first. And this goes, I've been working with homeless now for about 21 years. And you guys who've been around a long time will recognize that people say there used to be a point that we used to work on getting people housing ready, that you were homeless, and we felt like the best way to get you ready to be successful in housing was to keep you homeless and work on all those things, and then once you were ready, we're going to find you housing. Well, gone are those days. It is now everybody is housing ready. We work on those things once we've got you housed, and you know, every research will support the fact that the best way to overcome many issues is to first stabilize the housing situation. So who's housing first? Who's ready? Everyone is ready. Instill a sense of urgency, staff and clients. We joke and we say, and we actually did this, we made pretend vouchers and literally handed out vouchers that says, congratulations, you've been selected to be housed immediately. We did anything we could to increase this kind of sense of urgency with not just our staff, but our clients, because it felt like, oh my gosh, I have a voucher. It wasn't a real voucher. It was an incentive that made people believe and instill this sense of urgency. And it worked, and it really was just a piece of paper. So one of the other key things that we started to do is initiate the housing process at our first meeting. You know, many times we spend, and people that operate shelters know this, we spend a great deal of time and energy integrating people into homelessness. This is meal times, this is your locker combination, this is when you can use the phone. We spend so much time getting people acclimated to homelessness, and then after all of that, a week or so later, we're going to talk about housing, if you're appropriate for housing. Well, no. We want to actually reverse that and spend more time about getting you ready for housing immediately. And that means starting the process. You know, let's talk about housing. Let's talk about, you know, where you were last. What are going to be the barriers that are keeping you from being successful this time? What do I need to know? You know, I don't like surprises. So what do we need to know now instead of later, so we start this process? And we really are spending much more time on really talking about housing and less on about shelter and homelessness. So the other thing we did is we started to create partnerships with landlords, and particularly more of the smaller mom and pops, you know, that have anywhere from 5 to 10 properties. You know, they're not the big massive management firms and so forth, but really spending some time saying, how can we streamline the application process? How can we start that application process at the first time they're in shelter and start to recognize, again, those immediate barriers? So again, we're not going to surprise the landlord on anything. And part of that is that we looked at all of these landlord applications that looked similar. They had different logos on them or so forth, and how can we make one application or a common app? I joke and I say that my kids actually were applying for college. There's a common application for colleges, but there's not a common app for landlords. So we try to collect as many of these common applications or one application and identify and start filling those applications out immediately upon entry into shelter. We use groups now to go apartment hunting. We recognize that if we're trying to rapidly rehouse about 65% of the entire population that are staying in our shelters, then gone are the days of saying, I will spend 1 hour with you one time a week and we'll talk about finding an apartment. Now it is, we have a van and we have somebody that will take you and take a group of people and go apartment hunting. And part of that is we know different areas that the client wants to be in. We have different ideas on, you know, where this person has lived previously, where their kids might be in school, those kinds of things. And we literally take them in a minivan and go looking. And I jokingly say, load up, we're going apartment hunting, but that literally is the truth. We have scheduled times that a driver picks up and goes to different areas as well. Additionally, we equipped our staff with technology so that they can be on the go. We have iPads for case managers that's loaded with all of the common forms and applications and everything that they need, so they're not bound to whatever's in front of them at their desk. They can literally hit the road with a client, get any information they need, and use the technology that's been given to them that can quickly give information about what this particular landlord would want versus another landlord, and start that process. Also looking for availability of apartments online and so forth. Additionally, we spend a lot of time with our case managers doing these pre-inspections kinds of things, because we don't like being surprised. And for us, what we try to do is spend more time prepping our case managers to do what we call this pre-inspection, because there's nothing worse than you've been able to quickly get people through an application process to then find out that the unit's not going to pass a habitability or HQS inspection, but instead now we can kind of get an idea so a landlord can start to work on it right away. before we even, the person decides this is the apartment for them. And so the case managers are trained to know habitability. Many of them are also HQS as well, to know those kinds of inspections. So that, and I'm not saying that they're going to do a full inspection of every unit that's possibly going to be rented, but they're going to look for those glaring things that obviously are going to take some time for a landlord to remediate in order to get the person housed. And again, that can cut off 2 weeks or so of going back and forth with a landlord and re-inspecting and inspecting and so forth. So again, we're trying to do this as quickly as possible. The other thing is, you know, we don't like this, you know, you've heard me say this, and my staff knows this, everybody knows I don't like surprises. So the one thing that we do is let's pre-screen, you know, the candidate for the client or for the landlord, so that, again, we can be upfront about what that landlord's potentially going to find versus waiting for the background check. 5 days go by, you have to come, you know, you miss a phone call from a landlord. It's a week before you find out they didn't pass a background screen, and guess what? That goes into that 30 days or less. So again, we're trying to do everything that we can to go back to that, can I get you housed in 30 days? Next slide. So benchmark 2 is permanent housing success rates. 80% of the households that exit a rapid rehousing program should exit to permanent housing. So again, first and foremost, we build the expectation with the clients from the very beginning. And I mean that they have to understand this isn't subsidized housing for life. This is a temporary rapid rehousing program, and at some point our expectations are that our rental assistance and support services will stop, and you need to be successful on your own given all of the supports that we've given you, the connections we've made for you, but you have to understand this isn't for life. And I think by doing that, you know, is one of the key pieces. You can't wait for that. You can't say, okay, I've been serving you now for 4 months. What's your plan next month when your rental assistance ends? You must really be able to build those expectations with clients from the very beginning. And part of those expectations is understanding you have rent that's going to be due, because you're going into most fair market rent, and when we walk away, you have to assume those. So what are you going to do? And I think that's a key piece. So a lot of times, if you don't initiate those conversations from the very beginning, then you're not setting up your client for success. Again, we recognize that the key piece is this transition in place. You know, there's been lots of studies that say that many of the consumers will actually go another place, that after your rental assistance is over, they actually move again and again and again, and they're not stable ever. Well, one of the things what we're trying to do is really set them up to succeed from the very beginning, and the transition in places, you know, this is that model of why we're doing rapid rehousing versus transitional housing. You know, the transitional housing, many times they went to a spot, they stayed there, and then you graduated and you move and you're done, but yet you're now having to transition again. So now we're saying we want to put you in the place that you're going to be in and that you're going to be successful in, and we're going to transition. We're going to move out of here, but you're going to stay here. And so we want to recognize that there's a key piece to this is this transition in place and understanding that. The other thing is to exit to permanent housing. Homefull Solutions. We'll talk a little bit about Homefull Solutions. Is in order for people to exit rapid rehousing to permanent housing, whether that's the transition in place where they're going to stay where they were at, or whether that's another place that they're going to, is you got to pay rent. You've heard me say that all along. We're saying you got to pay rent. You have some responsibility here. We recognize that part of that is that you got to have an opportunity for jobs and to make some kind of income so that you can actually pay your rent. So for us, we created a social enterprise called Homefull Solutions, and the Homefull Solutions is an opportunity to a tool used both for us to build rapport and partnerships with landlords and provide jobs for our consumers. So we work with landlords in providing landscaping to the units, property maintenance, and unit turns, and this is a job training program for our consumers, and it's also permanent jobs for many of the folks as well. And so part of that is that we've been able to quickly turn an apartment unit for, some of these small landlords that don't have maintenance teams and so forth. So we're able to quote out a price to turn the unit, to take care of any maintenance issues. And like I said, this is a great opportunity to build rapport with landlords as well. And so, but ultimately it is about getting jobs for our consumers so that they can pay rent on their own. Additionally, to exit rapid rehousing programs, we look at recognizing, and you saw in our demographics, that many of our population have alcohol, drug, mental health issues, and so forth. We have to recognize that those things are probably not going to go away, and how do we, again, being honest to the support services that we want to provide, but recognizing we want you to stay where you are, we want you to remain housed. Then we're going to talk about the harm reduction models, reducing some of the negative behaviors and so forth. And then obviously we want to link you for mental health services as well. And again, those are the things that are happening in housing and not in the shelters any longer, and also recognizing, particularly with a harm reduction model, that they still have an income that they have to earn in order to pay their rent. And then the other piece is community support. There's also some of these non-traditional ways, and I think I speak about it a little bit more too, in recognizing where are they going to get community support, and how do we link them to that, recognizing food pantries that are available to wherever the neighborhoods are that they're at, but really trying to make sure that they're linked to all of the support services that they need so that they can exit to permanent housing appropriately. All right, next slide. So benchmark 3, 85% of households that exit a rapid rehousing program to permanent housing should not become homeless again within a year. So that's a key piece to recognizing the success of the program. A lot of people, debate whether or not rapid rehousing is successful, and many people debated about whether HPRP was successful. Well, we tend to here at Homefull to believe that rapid rehousing is successful. You saw our outcomes in terms of recidivism, but how is that? And I say that rapid rehousing, that they stayed in our program between 5 and 7 months, it didn't mean, though, that we never are going to see you again. We want our consumers to recognize, call us if you need help. Call us before you let it all go and return back into the shelter. And that's that flexible kind of piece that we recognize. We also recognize that not everybody can be successful with 3 months of rental assistance that are sequential. 1, 2, 3 months, you're done. There are people that month 2 seem to be, they've got their act together and they're able to pay their rent themselves, but boy, come month 5, something happened. So for us, we have to recognize that there's not this, this perfect one-size-fits-all. This is about people that have issues that are going to come up, somewhere down the road, and we want to be there for them. So I'm saying if your program can be as flexible as possible, you need it to be designed that way. And for us, because we're also at the front door doing the assessments for our community, we recognize that, oh wait, somebody showed back up or has tried to enter into the shelter again. What can we do? When we rapidly rehouse them, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, we're going to link them back up and re-engage them and figure out how to prevent them from coming back in. Some of it is, a disaster happened, their car repairs or something like that. And so how can we link you for those services? And again, when I say this is non-traditional, we're going to see you where you are at, both literally and figuratively. And I say that, many of you know that our consumers, you really do have to meet them where they are. And when I say literally, it could be their lunch hour at McDonald's, or it could be this is somebody who is actively enmeshed in alcohol or drug issues and so forth. So you have to recognize that, and then you have to go this in a non-traditional kind of way that, again, I've said it more than once, there is this no one-size-fits-all in a rapid rehousing program. Again, housing first. And the housing first motto was in the first one, how to get you housed, but it's also housing first in the final, how do I keep you housed? If you think first and foremost about what it's going to take to keep you housed, that's going to be the critical piece to it. And I mean that is, I got to pay rent, I've got to be a good neighbor, I've got to take care of tenancy issues, I've got to talk to my landlord, I've got to, I'm keeping housing first. Housing is my first priority. And that's kind of the key that we want to keep enmeshing in all of our programs, in our rapid rehousing programs, so that they know it is my housing first. Again, this is community-based. You've seen that a couple of times now. It is in the community. We are no longer providing the traditional support services or case management behind a desk in an office. Come and see me if you need something. We are out in the community. We are moving around. We are going to see you where you are at. And if you think you can do a rapid rehousing program from a desk, that's not the case. You're not going to be successful. Negotiation skills, I've used that, we used to call it advocacy, now it's negotiation, because you really are always trying to negotiate on the behalf of your client and teaching them those negotiation skills. How to manage the I'm behind in my rent with a landlord appropriately, how to negotiate, adversity. Something happened and I lost benefits for a month, and how do I do this? And those are the skills that both our staff are critical and that we are embarking with our consumers as well. We have also looked at and done for a few years, and that since 2008, critical time intervention. With rapid rehousing and looking at that model, it is in theory the good model that fits it, because it is a time sensitive. You look at people in terms of where they are at, which phase they're at, and stage. For us, though, we modified it significantly to be more flexible, but the key component of linking them to their community supports is really the big piece that stays with us. It is looking at those non-traditional supports. We find so many times, particularly when somebody enters into homelessness, and you ask for them to tell me who your support system is, and when they tell you that they can't come up with somebody, then you recognize that there's a problem, and that's one of the key areas I believe that leads to homelessness, is there is no support. And so for us, we're having to think outside of it. Where do you go to church? Where do you go to the food pantry? They didn't think that those were support systems, and we're saying no, those are key critical support systems, and we want to name them, get you acclimated to using them, so that you're no longer saying, but I got the best services ever in the shelter, so I'm going to go back to the shelter. No, we don't want that. We want you to get your support in the community in which you're living, and that's not the shelter. Additionally, again, we say you got to pay rent. How do you pay rent? You have a job, you have an income, employment services. Not only did we create our social enterprise, Homefull Solutions, but we also created strong connections to employment agencies, firms that are hiring. We created newsletters. We actually carved out our own staff person that is now completely dedicated to finding job and job opportunities, and really we just saw this major increase in the number of people who are now being able to get jobs and to get linkages, and we really have started to put a focus of jobs. Before it was, what benefit can I get you? What's the resources that I can get you? And now it is, job can I help you get? And that's a different mindset for homeless people. You know, it's usually, you know, what is it that I'm eligible for? Well, guess what? You're eligible for a job. And so that's one of our key pieces that we've been trying to focus. And part of that came a few years ago when we started looking at our employment outcomes. And we actually have a consumer advisory group that we meet with periodically through the year, and one of the key pieces that they told us is they need jobs, and you know, and they need employers who are as sensitive as the landlords were asking to be. And so for us, we said that's what we have to do, is we have to build relationships with not only landlords but employers. We have employment fairs, we have just like I told you, we load up people in the van to go apartment hunting. We now load up people in the van to go job hunting. And so, you know, it really is just creating a different culture that says, you know, you are capable of being successful outside of the emergency shelters, and that's what our goal is for you. So, next. All right, that ends mine. I guess we can take some questions. I did put on here where we actually have a conference that will be coming up in August, the 1st and 2nd. It's called Building Blocks for a Better Community. You can log on to our website and learn more about that as well.
Great, thank you so much, Tina. That was great. We do have time for a couple of questions, and we've had a few come in. One of them is two actually were about the assessment tool you used and whether you used the same assessment tool for singles and families.
Okay, yes. We do use the same assessment tool that is for our singles and our families. Obviously there's some different questions as it pertains to families, you know, in terms of the children and their linkage and their benefits and school and child care issues and stuff. But overall, yes, our assessment is the same tool for both.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about how you exit people from the program? I know you mentioned that, but just a little bit more detail would be
Sure.
helpful.
And one of the things that we've done in terms of looking at the exits from the rapid rehousing, and when I talked about the fact that our program needs to be flexible, is that our financial assistance might be more time limited in terms of the amount that we can provide versus the support services. So for us, you know, we could stop a financial assistance after 4 months, but we're going to keep them open. And I say open, meaning that they can continue to get the support services after we've been providing the financial assistance. And it really isn't until after we believe they are successfully housed, maintaining their own, paying their own income or paying their own rent and so forth. And so that's kind of why we give ourselves that little bit of window to keep them open, because again, when I said that it's 3 months later, you know, and they looked really good when we stopped providing the financial assistance, but oh wow, 3 months later something happened. And so we're working with them for a longer amount of time, particularly in the support services piece of it, just in case they need that extra piece. And then additionally, if they show up at our front door, you know, without having reached out to their caseworker, who was the rapid rehousing caseworker, then we're going to quickly relink them to their rapid rehousing caseworker so that we can prevent them from coming back into the shelter. So our exits aren't that perfect sequential. At 5 months, everybody exits, or we can keep them open for 9 months to a year, so that we're kind of that safety net for them during that period of, oh my gosh, the rental assistance has stopped and now I need an emergency happen. So it's not this perfect, at the end of this everybody gets closed. It's very flexible, and granted, there are some people that after 3 months they're good, we close them, they've exited, and we never see them again, which is the best case scenario. But again, we recognize that really on measuring how well they're able to uphold the lease obligations, which is paying rent, how they're doing with their budgets, are they maintaining their job, their transportation issues taken care of, all of those things. So it's more related to the service piece than it is to the financial piece when we exit someone.
Great, thanks so much. So this is a question about recommendations for funders. Is there anything that your funders did that was helpful to your agency in implementing such an effective program?
That's a good question. I think the thing, and particularly because we were locally funded originally, and then we've gone through ESG and COC and so forth. But I think one of the key things are, and even before the benchmarks came out, was what is its impact in reducing the amount of time people experience homelessness. And again, we said there's gradual housing, that's not rapid rehousing. And so one of the key pieces was making the case that we are reducing homelessness, or the time people spend homeless, which ultimately, there's a lot of cost comparisons that you can make the case for as well in terms of the cost to shelter somebody or put someone into permanent supportive housing versus it is paying rent for a time-limited amount of period with support services. And I think funders find that a very strong case, that you're ending that person's episode of homelessness, 2, you're providing a cost-efficient program, and then obviously you're really working on making somebody very self-sufficient and independent, which is something that all funders really enjoy hearing about. So I think it's the case of the cost efficiency and reducing that amount of time somebody experiences homelessness. And even with that, particularly with families, meaning the impact of being homeless on children is even a greater case to make as well.
Great, thank you. So I know you talked a bit about this, but one of the questions that's come in is, how do you keep landlords engaged throughout the program?
Another good question. One of the things that we like to do is we have a lot of communications with landlords. We have open houses where landlords will come in, they talk with staff, we've put out flyers of information. One of the worst things is that you're not clear with a landlord up front about the whole process. It is a very bureaucratic, meaning there's a lot of paperwork associated with rapid rehousing, and before we can issue a check, there's a lot of things that have to happen. There's nothing worse than surprising the landlord with, oh yeah, you have to do this, this, and this. So I think this real open communication, and we have some staff here that are very good at always having great communications with landlords. The other piece that I talked about was the Homefull solutions. One of the key pieces that and I've seen this question come up a few times about, how do you incentivize landlords to create a landlord pool willing to participate and so forth, is, we started this, the Homefull solutions was really designed not only for the jobs for the consumers, but it was about trying to provide a service to the landlords at a better cost than they could afford themselves, or they could subcontract out. And so we landscape apartment buildings for landlords, we do these maintenance turns for landlords, we address any minor issues so that they're not having to constantly respond to maintenance issues and so forth, and really have become what I'd like to think is an asset for our landlords who are participating with us, instead of, oh no, I don't, here comes homeless people, I don't want you. It really is, here comes Homefull, and with Homefull rapid rehousing program comes rental assistance and a lot of support, not just for the consumer, but the support for the landlord. And I think that's one of our key pieces that, we want to be very transparent and open, and think that, we have 2 clients. Our client is the consumer that's renting, and it's also the landlord who we're working with as well.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. 2 questions have come in about the case management client ratio that you use, and does this vary by population?
It does. You know, our goal is to always look at making sure caseloads are equitable. We have productivity requirements for our staff. We're also trying to be mindful of the fact that, you know, our rapid rehousing case management starts in the gateway and goes till they're stably housed. So we're trying to be mindful of the fact of, I have a case manager that might have a total caseload of 25 to 30, and 5 to 10 of those are community-based, already housed. 5 more have just come into the shelter, and 10 are about to be housed. So that's a lot for a case manager to juggle, and so we're constantly making sure that there's some equitable kind of ratios of how many people you've got in what phase or what stage of rapid rehousing. Because, you know, even those who are housed have different stages. You know, when you get housed right at the beginning, you need a lot. You need furniture, you need, you know, all of those things to get you settled, and our case managers are running themselves crazy to get all those things set up for the client. And then you have somebody that's been housed for 4 months, that's a little bit different. So we're always managing where that person is in terms of that caseload, to making sure that this case manager can handle that very diverse pool. But overall, we'd like it to be somewhere between 25 and 35. And families, we do look at the lower end of those as well, mainly because we all know the difference between case managing singles and case managing families. There's children, and there's all their issues that you have to think of. But yeah, so we're constantly juggling caseloads.
Great, thank you so much. So I think that will conclude our webinar. I just want to thank Tina for her excellent presentation. We will be posting slides and the audio on our website, and we will send an email to everybody who registered for the webinar today with that information. I also want to put a plug in for our June 28th webinar at 1 p.m. where we will have 2 providers talking about the Rapid Rehousing Performance Evaluation Improvement Toolkit. This is a new toolkit that we'll be releasing on the 28th, and it's a companion piece to the performance benchmarks that Tina had been discussing during the webinar. So we hope you will join us then. Thank you again, and have a good day.